right. It's another week of our favorite Poe class series. My name is Jose Vega. If you've never come to one of our classes before or one of our live streams, this is a part of our weekly series where first we start off with a little bit of an introduction from me, where I just kind of give you my thoughts on the week, what we've done on the week, and then we pass things off to Dennis Speed for our Edgar Poe class. I want to thank Bad Wolf and William Gilchrist for being early. I'm putting your comments up on the screen. Thank you very much for that. It means a lot that you're here and you're ready to come and participate in the class with us. All right, with that being said, I just want to kind of kick things off. I know there are some things on the top of people's minds about what happened with the White House today. We will get to that in just a second. Before I go to that, I actually want to talk a little bit about what was done this week. I personally myself, I'm just recovering now from a pretty bad cold that I got, and I I don't know, if people have similar experiences outside of New York City, and I would like to know what your experience is like in your town or country, as I see we have people here from other countries as well. But I saw my doctor for all of about 90 seconds or so when I went to the urgent care. And I was told, look, they tested me for the flu, they tested me for COVID, they said it was negative. So they said it's probably one of these 19 viruses floating around in New York City right now. So here's some cough syrup, here's some Sudafed, and good luck. And you'll feel better, hopefully, maybe in a couple days. That was my entire experience here in the Bronx, trying to get some kind of treatment. And that's with insurance, by the way. And I then asked if I could get tested for some other things, and they said my insurance wouldn't cover some of these tests. So I said, okay, never mind then. I'll just go with what you tell me. This is the reality for a lot of people here in New York. That being said, though, even though I wasn't super active this week, my friend Robert Castle was in Washington, D.C. He's one of the people that work on my campaign. And actually, he ran into Bill Gates with another friend of ours, Bob Baker. And we have a minute-long video here that we're going to play on that experience. So if we can just go to that video of them confronting. This is them in the halls of the Capitol. And they see Bill Gates just come out of nowhere.
All right, appreciate it.
Hey, Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates. No, yeah, I understand, but Mr. Gates, I'm here with a farm leader, an organizer, who's very concerned about the state of the small independent family farms. Could you?
Sorry.
You know, billionaires like you walk with impunity through the halls of our Congress. You refuse to speak to people like my friend Bob here, who's organizing with farmers all across the country who are extremely concerned about the cartels that are purchasing all of their land.
You gotta be careful.
What were you meeting with the congressman from Kentucky about? Beneficent things, presumably for the general welfare?
So that happened this week, and what they were actually there to do was to intervene on the fact that you had all these European leaders coming into town to try and appease Donald Trump and warm up to him. But specifically, Keir Starmer was in town on Wednesday, and what we were passing out was this leaflet here. And the U.S.-British special relationship. You can find this entire leaflet on the LaRouche organization .com or .org. It is up on their website. And our people in Washington, Robert Castle and others, were there handing out this leaflet, going office to office, getting meetings, which I found out. It was a very successful trip. We had a lot of warm reactions down there. And thankfully, we were down there on a Wednesday because as I'm about to get into now with our friend Dennis Speed, I'm sure a lot of people saw what happened in the White House today. And just before I pass things off to Dennis Speed, I mean, we saw Keir Starmer come to the White House today, cozying up to Donald Trump, giving him an invite from King Charles, saying, we want you to come over across the pond and have a nice, lovely dinner with the king. We had Emmanuel Macron also coming into town to Washington, D.C., basically laying the groundwork and the prep work because Zelenskyy was supposed to come to town today. And I'm sure a lot of you saw the result of that. But for more on what exactly happened today and to get us started as well, I'm going to now pass things over to Dennis Speed. Dennis, are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you able to hear me, Jose?
Yes, we are.
Well, we're not going to keep people in suspense. And for those of you that don't know what occurred, let me just sort of set up the clip we're going to be watching. There was a meeting at the White House today involving Zelenskyy and the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump. And President Trump decided to allow for a kind of open press conference to occur involving all three. And he let the questions go, and something occurred toward the end. And where we're coming in is that there's already been a discussion in which Vice President Vance, after some out of place remarks by Zelenskyy, has just brought up that Zelenskyy had traveled to Pennsylvania on behalf, effectively, of the Biden campaign and had campaigned against Trump there. And there is a sort of a back and forth going on. And Vance is trying to say or talk about how Zelenskyy has not shown in the time in which he has been at the White House as of today, any gratitude for what the United States had done and had offered for his country. So we're coming in at the middle of the exchange. But the reason we're going to begin this way is it addresses some elements of what we've been discussing in the AgriPro class all along. And rather than describe any of what those elements are, let's just let the clip roll. And you're going to see something that you've never seen before. In fact, something you've never seen before in American history.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No, you've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times
that there,
thank you
accept
to
that,
American people.
accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on
I
over
understand,
there.
sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't, please,
you're running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then
President.
then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're
I
saying
said,
you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what-
that
what
wasn't
this
with me.
means. It
That was
wasn't
with
with you.
a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person.
This
That
is
was
your,
with,
this
that was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry,
It's going to be
here.
a tough deal to make. because the attitudes have to change.
What if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia, the 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right, we'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thank you.
Guys, let's go. Guys, come on, let's go.
We'll see, I don't know.
All right, guys, come on. Please. Hey, come on. Guys, come on.
All right. Now, that event should be not contrasted to, but should be considered along with a different event, not in the context of what I'm about to say, but just along with this. And that was the drama that evolved yesterday involving the Attorney General of the United States and the Director of the FBI. This was around the Jeffrey Epstein files. And that drama was described in a letter that was dated February 27th. That was yesterday. And I will read you the letter and then say a couple of things to get our reading for tonight going. So this is from the Office of the Attorney General of the United States, Washington, D.C., February 27th, 2025. Dear Director Patel, meaning Kash Patel of the FBI. Before you came into office, I requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response to this request, I received approximately 200 pages of documents, which consisted primarily of flight logs, Epstein's list of contacts, and a list of victims' names and phone numbers. I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we have received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, that's today, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio, and video recordings, and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, regardless of how such information was obtained. There will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The Department of Justice will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with law, as I have done my entire career as a prosecutor. I'm also directing you to conduct an immediate investigation into why my order to the FBI was not followed. You will deliver to me a comprehensive report of your findings and proposed personnel actions within 14 days. I appreciate your immediate attention to this important matter. I know that we are both committed to transparency for the American people, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to serve our president and the country. Okay, so that's the letter. Now, why should that be talked about alongside what we just saw? I would state that the most notable element of what you saw with Trump, as entertaining as it in fact is, was his discussion of what he and Vladimir Putin went through together in Russiagate, and how Russia had nothing to do with it. He didn't say, I had nothing to do with colluding with Russia. He said Russia had nothing to do with it. And then he criticized the 51 intelligence chiefs that signed on to the laptop from hell. Now, if you put that together with this letter, and you recognize that this is not about the content of the Epstein files, which may be useful, may be productive, may be interesting, apart from the pornography and the actual interest in the files, the issue there is who authorized the FBI agents not to turn over the additional files. There should not be a presumption that 2 or 3 renegade agents simply did not turn over those files. Now, this is important because what occurred in that White House exchange, whether Zelenskyy knew it or not, is that he provoked a response that has now triggered something completely unrelated in itself to Ukraine, except from the standpoint of Zelenskyy's personal role in Russiagate, because it was Zelenskyy's phone call with Trump, which was used to precipitate the initial impeachment. Now, why does that set up tonight and tonight's story? Well, it'll become, I think, obvious in our reading of the story, but there's a saying some of you may know. Some of you will know it because it's just simply an adage. And some of you will know it from Marvin Gaye's Heard It Through the Grapevine. Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. Now, there's a reason that that's important, because the things that people are convinced are evidence are largely contrivances, which are simply intended to mislead the credulous into believing that they have an understanding of something in order for something entirely different to take place. So, for example, something entirely different happened in Ukraine than any of that's being discussed. Something entirely different occurred, particularly in the years between 2004 and 2014 in Ukraine. Ukraine war began in 2014, and it did not begin with the Russians. Ukraine war began with the overthrow of the government through the auspices of the United States intelligence community. The illegal overthrow of a democratically elected government, I might add, in an operation that was under the supervision at the time of one Joe Biden. So an entirely different story as to what actually happened. So this is the sort of zone in which we are now traveling. There are many other things, and you may have other comments about it. And so what we're going to do right now is get right to the story. And I want to, I guess we'll bring it up on the screen. This story is called Thou Art the Man, and it was written in 1844. And I'm going to begin it. Get my setup here. And then we've got other readers that you'll be hearing, but some people are unfamiliar with the story, and therefore I'll get it started. So I got my, yeah, here we are. Okay. The story takes place in a small town and called Rattleboro. Thou art the man. I will now play the Oedipus to the Rattleboro enigma. I will expound to you, as I alone can, the secret of the engineering that affected the Rattleboro miracle, the one, the true, the admitted, the undisputed, the indisputable miracle, which put a definite end to infidelity among the Rattleburgers and converted to the orthodoxy of the grandames all the carnal-minded who had ventured to be skeptical before. This event, which I should be sorry to discuss in a tone of unsuitable levity, occurred in the summer of 1844, I'll say. Mr. Barnabas Shuttleworthy, one of the wealthiest and most respectable citizens of the borough, had been missing for several days under circumstances which gave rise to suspicion of foul play. Mr. Shuttleworthy had set out from Rattleboro very early one Saturday morning on horseback, with the avowed intention of proceeding to the city of about 15 miles distant and of returning the night of the same day. 2 hours after his departure, however, his horse returned without him and without the saddlebags which had been strapped on his back at starting. The animal was wounded, too, and covered with mud. These circumstances naturally gave rise to much alarm among the friends of the missing man, and when it was found on Sunday morning that he had not yet made his appearance, the whole borough arose en masse to go and look for his body. The foremost and most energetic in instituting this search was the bosom friend of Mr. Shuttleworthy, a Mr. Charles Goodfellow, or as he was universally called, Charlie Goodfellow, or Old Charlie Goodfellow. Now, whether it is marvelous coincidence or whether it is that the name itself has an imperceptible effect upon the character, never yet been able to ascertain. But the fact is unquestionable that there never yet was any person named Charles who was not an open, manly, honest, good-natured, and frank-hearted fellow, with a rich, clear voice that did you good to hear it, and an eye that looked you always straight in the face, as much as to say, I have a clear conscience myself, am afraid of no man, and am altogether above doing a mean action. And thus all the hearty, careless, walking gentlemen of the stage are very certain to be called Charles. Now, old Charlie Goodfellow, although he had been in Rattleboro not longer than 6 months or thereabouts, and although nobody knew anything about him before he came to settle in the neighborhood, had experienced no difficulty in the world in making the acquaintance of all the respectable people in the borough. Not a man of them but would have taken his bare word for 1,000 at any moment. And as for the women, there's no saying what they would not have done to oblige him. And all of this came of his having been christened Charles, and of his possessing in consequence that ingenuous face, which is proverbially the very, quote, best letter of recommendation. I've already said that Mr. Shuttleworthy was one of the most respectable, and undoubtedly he was the most wealthy man in Rattleboro, while old Charlie Goodfellow was upon as intimate terms with him as if he had been his own brother. The two old gentlemen were next door neighbors, and although Mr. Shuttleworthy seldom, if ever, visited old Charlie, and never was known to take a meal in his house, still this did not prevent the two friends from being exceedingly intimate, as I have just observed, for old Charlie never let a day pass without stepping in 3 or 4 times to see how his neighbor came on. And very often he would stay to breakfast or tea, and almost always to dinner. And then the amount of wine that was made way with by the two cronies at a sitting, it would be really a difficult thing to ascertain. Old Charlie's favorite beverage was Chateau Margaux, and it appeared to do Mr. Shuttleworthy's heart good to see the old fellow swallow it, as he did quart after quart, so that one day, when the wine was in, and the wit, as a natural consequence, somewhat out, he said to his crony as he slapped him upon the back, Kynan,
Oh, sorry. I tell you what it is, old Charlie. You are, by all odds, the heartiest old fellow I ever came across in all my born days. And, since you love to guzzle the wine at that fashion, I'll be darned if I don't have to make thee a present of a big box of the Chateau Margaux. Odd rot me.
Mr. Shuttleworthy had a sad habit of swearing, although he seldom went beyond odd rot me or by gosh or by the jolly golly,
Odd rot me.
says he.
If I don't send an order to town this very afternoon for a double box of the best that can be got, and I'll make ye a present of it. I will. Ye needn't say a word now. I will. I tell ye, and there's an end of it. So look out for it. It will come to hand some of these fine days, precisely when ye are looking for it the least.
I mentioned this little bit of liberality on the part of Mr. Shuttleworthy just by way of showing you how very intimate an understanding existed between the two friends. So, Jose, I'm going to want you to pick up the narration. I'm going to do a little bit more, and then you pick it up, okay?
Yeah, sure. You can still hear me okay, right?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay.
I'll do one more paragraph, and then you come in. Well, on the Sunday morning in question, when it came to be fairly understood that Mr. Shuttleworthy had met with foul play, I never saw anyone so profoundly affected as old Charlie Goodfellow. When he first heard that the horse had come home without his master, and without his master's saddlebags, and all bloody from a pistol shot that had gone clean through and through the poor animal's chest without quite killing him. When he heard all this, he turned as pale as if the missing man had been his own dear brother or father, and shivered and shook all over as if he had had a fit of the ague.
At first, he was too much overpowered with grief to be able to do anything at all, or to decide upon any plan of action, so that for a long time he endeavored to dissuade Mr. Shuttleworthy's other friends from making a stir about the matter, thinking it best to wait a while, say for a week or two, or a month or two, to see if something wouldn't turn up, or if Mr. Shuttleworthy wouldn't come in the natural way, and explain his reasons for sending his horse on before. I dare say you have often observed this disposition to temporize or to procrastinate in people who are laboring under any very poignant sorrow. Their powers of mind seem to be rendered torpid, so that they have a horror of anything like action, and like nothing in the world, so well as to lie quietly in bed and nurse their grief, as the old ladies express it. That is to say, ruminate over their trouble. The people of Rattleborough had, indeed, so high an opinion of the wisdom and discretion of old Charlie, that the greater part of them felt disposed to agree with him, and not make a stir in the business, quote, until something should turn up, as the honest old gentleman worded it. And I believe that, after all, this would have been the general determination, but for the very suspicious interference of Mr. Shuttleworthy's nephew a young man of very dissipated habits and otherwise of rather bad character. This nephew, whose name was Pennyfeather, would listen to nothing like reason in the matter of lying quiet, but insisted upon making immediate search for the corpse of the murdered man. This was the expression he employed, and Mr. Goodfellow acutely remarked at the time that it was a singular expression, to say no more. This remark of old Charlie's, too, had great effect upon the crowd, and one of the party was heard to ask very impressively, how it happened that young Mr. Pennyfeather was so intimately cognizant of all the circumstances connected with his wealthy uncle's disappearance as to feel authorized to assert distinctly and unequivocally that his uncle was a murdered man. Hereupon some little squibbing and bickering occurred among various members of the crowd, especially between old Charlie and Mr. Pennyfeather. Although this latter occurrence was indeed by no means a novelty, for little good will have subsisted between the parties for the last 3 or 4 months, and matters had even gone so far that Mr. Pennyfeather had actually knocked down his uncle's friend for some alleged excess of liberty that the latter had taken in the uncle's house of which the nephew was an inmate. On this occasion, old Charlie is said to have behaved with exemplary moderation and Christian charity. He arose from the blow, adjusted his clothes, and made no attempt at retaliation at all, merely muttering a few words about taking summary vengeance at the first convenient opportunity. A natural and very justifiable ebullition of anger, which meant nothing, however, and, beyond doubt, was no sooner given vent to than forgotten.
Okay, let's stop for a minute. I just want to make sure everybody's clear of what's happening. So, Jose, why don't you summarize so far as you can understand what has happened so far?
So basically, old Charlie recounts that a horse appeared with a bullet wound in it, but it wasn't dead, and there was nobody riding the horse. And so it's like, Mr. Shuttleworthy's horse got back here with a hole in its chest. Maybe we should just wait and see. Maybe Mr. Shuttleworthy or something will happen. Maybe if we wait a week or 2 or a couple of months. But then Mr. Pennyfeather, the nephew of Mr. Pennyfeather, shows up and is like, what are we, crazy? Like, how about we look into this now? Let's go over the circumstances of what happened. Excuse me. And somebody in the crowd says, you seem to know quite a lot about what happened to your uncle and the circumstantial evidence behind this, to claim that he may have been murdered. And then at this point, old Charlie and Mr. Pennyfeather fight, and then Mr. Pennyfeather punches old Charlie. And then old Charlie gets back up, wipes himself off, dusts himself off, and says that he will take summary vengeance at the first convenient opportunity. and so, yeah.
Okay.
Just one small thing. The narration for this is not old Charlie, but is a third party.
Right. The narrator is the third party.
Right. Okay. Anybody have anything else to add just in terms of what actually happened so far?
Well, I think one detail that was left out of the summary is that just with the last thing we read, I think that this fight between Pennyfeather and old Charlie had been happening for some months, and in the same timeline as this excessive drinking.
Right.
With
and let's also remember that old Charlie has been in town for 6 months. It's also something else just to remember that was said. It may not be obvious because he's so ensconced in the town. It seems like he's been there forever. Okay, so Jose, why don't you continue, and I'd like to go maybe to Lynn as the narrator after you just to continue, Jose, and whenever you want to stop. Go ahead.
However these matters may be, which have no reference to the point now at issue, it is quite certain that the people of Rattleborough, principally through the persuasion of Mr. Pennyfeather, came at length to the determination of dispersing over the adjacent country in search of the missing Mr. Shuttleworthy. I say they came to this determination in the first instance. After it had been fully resolved that a search should be made, it was considered almost a matter of course that the seekers should disperse. That is to say, distribute themselves in parties for the more thorough examination of the region round about. I forget, however, by what ingenious train of reasoning it was that old Charlie finally convinced the assembly that this was the most injudicious plan that could be pursued. Convince them, however, he did, all except Mr. Pennyfeather, and in the end, it was arranged that a search should be instituted, carefully and very thoroughly by the burghers en masse, old Charlie himself leading the way. as for the matter of that, there could have been no better pioneer than old Charlie, whom everybody knew to have the eye of a lynx. But although he led them into all manner of out-of-the-way holes and corners by routes that nobody had ever suspected of existing in the neighborhood, and although the search was incessantly kept up day and night for nearly a week, still no trace of Mr. Shuttleworthy could be discovered. When I say no trace, however, I must not be understood to speak literally, for trace, to some extent, there certainly was. The poor gentleman had been tracked by his horse's shoes, which were peculiar, to a spot about 3 miles to the east of the borough on the main road leading to the city. Here the track made off into a bypath through a piece of woodland, the path coming out again into the main road and cutting off about half a mile of the regular distance. Following the shoe marks down this lane, the party came at length to a pool of stagnant water, half hidden by the brambles to the right of the lane. And opposite this pool, all vestige of the track was lost sight of. It appeared, however, that a struggle of some nature had taken place, and it seemed as if some large and heavy body, much larger and heavier than a man, had been drawn from the bypath to the pool. This latter was carefully dragged twice, but nothing was found, and the party were upon the point of going away, in despair of coming to any result, when Providence suggested to Mr. Goodfellow the expediency of draining the water off altogether. This project was received with cheers and many high compliments to old Charlie upon his sagacity and consideration, as many of the burghers had brought spades with them, supposing that they might possibly be called upon to disinter a corpse. The drain was easily and speedily effected, and no sooner was the bottom visible than right in the middle of the mud that remained was discovered a black silk velvet waistcoat, which nearly everyone present immediately recognized as the property of Mr. Pennyfeather. This waistcoat was much torn and stained with blood, and there were several persons among the party who had a distinct remembrance of its having been worn by its owner on the very morning of Mr. Shuttleworthy's departure for the city, while there were others, again, ready to testify upon oath, if required, that Mr. P did not wear the garment in question at any period during the remainder of that memorable day. Nor could anyone be found to say that he had seen it upon Mr. P.'s person at any period at all subsequent to Mr. Shuttleworthy's disappearance. Then do you want to take over?
Sure. I think to be on camera, to be here.
You want to be on camera? Just sit right here.
Matters now wore a very suspicious aspect for Mr. Pennyfeather, and it was observed as an indubitable confirmation of the suspicions that were excited against him that he grew exceedingly pale, and when asked if he had what he had to say for himself, was utterly incapable of saying a word. Hereupon the few friends of his riotous mode of living had left him, deserted him at once to a man, and were even more clamorous than his ancient and avowed enemies for his instantaneous arrest. But on the other hand, the magnanimity of Mr. Goodfellow shone forth with only the more brilliant luster through contrast. He made a warm and intensely eloquent defense of Mr. Pennyfeather, in which he alluded more than once to his own sincere forgiveness of the wild gentleman. The quote, or someone reading that? The quote, the air of the worthy Mr. Goodfellow, Mr. Shuttleworthy, for the insult which he, the young gentleman, had, no doubt, in the heat of passion, thought proper to put upon himself, Mr. Goodfellow. He forgave him for it, he said.
I should read that.
Okay.
He forgave him for it,
He said,
from the very bottom of his heart, and for himself, Mr. Goodfellow, so far from pushing the suspicious circumstances to extremity, which, he was sorry to say, really had arisen against Mr. Pennyfeather. He would make every exertion in his power, would employ all the little eloquence in his permission, to soften down, as much as he could conscientiously do so, the worst features of this really exceedingly perplexing piece of business.
Mr. Goodfellow went on for some half hour longer in this strain, very much to the credit both of his head and of his heart. But your warm-hearted people are seldom opposite in their observations. They run into all sorts of blunders, contretemps and malapropisms, and the hot-headedness of their zeal to serve a friend. Thus, often with the kindest intentions in the world, doing infinitely more to prejudice his cause than to advance it. So, in the present instant, it turned out that all the eloquence of old Charlie, for although he labored earnestly in behalf of the suspected, yet it so happened somehow or other that every syllable he uttered, of which the direct but unwitting tendency was not to exalt the speaker in the good opinion of his audience, it had the effect of deepening the suspicion already attached to the individual whose cause he pled, and of arousing against him the fury of the mob. One of the most unaccountable errors committed by the orator was his allusion to the suspected as the quote, heir of the worthy old gentleman, Mr. Goodfellow, Shuttlesworthy. The people had never really thought of this before. They had only remembered certain threats of disinheritance uttered a year or two previously by the uncle, who had no living relative except the nephew, and they had therefore always looked upon this disinheritance as a matter that was settled. So single-minded a race of beings were the Rattleburgers, but the remark of old Charlie's brought them at once to the consideration of this point, and thus gave them to see the possibility of the threats having been nothing more than a threat. And straightway hereupon rose the natural suspicion of cui bono, a question that tended even more than the waistcoat to fasten the terrible crime upon the young man. And here, lest I be misunderstood, permit me to digress for a moment, merely to observe that the exceedingly brief and simple Latin phrase which I have employed is invariably mistranslated and misconceived. Cui bono. In all the crack novels and elsewhere, in those of Mrs. Gore, for example, the author of Cecil, a lady who quotes all the tongues from the Chaldean to the Chickasaw, and is helped in her learning, quote, as needed upon a systematic plan by Mr. Beckford. In all the crack novels, I say, from those of Bulwer to Dinkins to those of Turnerpenny and Ainsworth, the two little Latin words cui bono are rendered, quote, to what purpose, or as if cui bono, to what good. Their true meaning, nevertheless, is, quote, for whose advantage, cui, to whom, bono, is for a benefit. It is a purely legal phrase and applicable precisely in cases such as we now have under consideration, where the probability of the doer of a deed hinges upon the probability of benefit accruing to this individual or to that from the deed's accomplishments. Now, in the present instance, the question cui bono very pointedly implicated Mr. Pennyfeather. His uncle had threatened him, making a will in his favor with disinheritance, but the threat had not actually been kept. The original will, it appeared, had not been altered. Had it been altered, the only supposable motive for murder on the part of the suspected would have been the ordinary one of revenge. But even this would have been counteracted by the hope of reinstatement into the good graces of the uncle. But the will being unaltered, while the threat to alter remained suspended over the nephew's head, there appears at once the very strongest possible inducement for the atrocity. And so concluded, very sagaciously, the worthy citizens of the borough of Rattle. Shall I continue? I can. Mr. Pennyfeather was accordingly arrested on the spot, and the crowd, after some farther search, proceeded homeward, having him in custody. On the route, however, another circumstance occurred tending to confirm the suspicion entertained. Mr. Goodfellow, whose zeal led him to always be a little in advance of the party, was seen suddenly to run forward a few paces, stoop, and then apparently to pick up some small object from the glass. Having quickly examined it, he was observed, too, to make a sort of half attempt at concealing it in his coat pocket, but his action was noticed, as I say, and consequently prevented when the object picked up was found to be a Spanish knife, with a dozen persons at once recognizing it as belonging to Mr. Pennyfeather. Moreover, his initials were engraved upon the handle. The blade of this knife was open and bloody.
We could have either Robert or Jose read. Robert, you want to try to read? Because I don't think you have any, there's no character speaking, I think, in the next few.
Sure.
Okay. And let's just check one other thing. Is everybody following what's going on? Anybody want to give a quick summary?
Sort of. I think I understood the reasoning as to why they arrested Mr. Pennyfeather, because they're like, well, who benefits? It's like clearly like this guy can inherit the will, and he seeks to benefit the most. Therefore, he is the person who most likely killed his uncle. Therefore, we should arrest him.
Yeah. Well, and they drained the pond and found
the waistcoat. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of clues, so to speak.
Okay.
The clues, the waistcoat we already mentioned, and then of course there's the various insertions, which are implications.
Yeah, wait, don't do that. Don't load it. Don't load it.
Okay, all right.
But there's one. But why did the people draw this conclusion?
Because old Charlie defended him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Charlie's defense indicts him.
Yeah.
Okay.
No doubt now remained of the guilt of the nephew, and immediately upon reaching Rattleborough, he was taken before a magistrate for examination. Here, matters again took a most unfavorable turn. The prisoner, being questioned as to his whereabouts on the morning of Mr. Shuttleworthy's disappearance, had absolutely the audacity to acknowledge that on that very morning he had been out with his rifle, deer stalking, in the immediate neighborhood of the pool where the blood-stained waistcoat had been discovered, through the sagacity of Mr. Goodfellow. This latter now came forward, and with tears in his eyes, asked permission to be examined. He said that stern sense of duty he owed to his Maker, not less than to his fellow men, would permit him no longer to remain silent. Hitherto, the sincerest affection for the young man, notwithstanding the latter's ill treatment of himself, Mr. Goodfellow, had induced him to make every hypothesis which imagination could suggest, by way of endeavoring to account for what appeared suspicious in the circumstances that told so seriously against the Pennyfeather. But these circumstances were now altogether too convincing, too damning. He would hesitate no longer. He would tell all he knew, although his heart, Mr. Goodfellow's, should absolutely burst asunder in the effort. He then went on to state that on the afternoon of the day previous to Mr. Shuttleworthy's departure for the city, that worthy old gentleman had mentioned to his nephew, in his hearing, Mr. Goodfellow's, that his object in going to town on the morrow was to make a deposit of an unusually large sum of money in the Farmers and Mechanics Bank, and that then and there the said Mr. Shuttleworthy had distinctly avowed to the said nephew his irrevocable determination of rescinding the will originally made and of cutting him off with a shilling. He, the witness, now solemnly called upon the accused to state whether what he, the witness, had just stated was or was not the truth in every substantial particular. Much to the astonishment of everyone present, Mr. Pennyfeather frankly admitted that it was. The magistrate now considered it his duty to send a couple of constables to search the chamber of the accused in the house of his uncle. From this search, they almost immediately returned with the well-known steel-bound, russet leather pocketbook, which the old gentleman had been in the habit of carrying for years. Its valuable contents, however, had been abstracted, and the magistrate in vain endeavored to extort from the prisoner the use which had been made of them, or the place of their concealment. Indeed, he obstinately denied all knowledge of the matter. The constables also discovered, between the bed and sacking of the unhappy man, a shirt and neck handkerchief, both marked with the initials of his name, and both hideously besmeared with the blood of the victim. At this juncture, it was announced that the horse of the murdered man had just expired in the stable from the effects of the wound he had received, and it was proposed by Mr. Goodfellow that a post-mortem examination of the beast should be immediately made, with the view, if possible, of discovering the ball. This was accordingly done, and as if to demonstrate beyond a question the guilt of the accused, Mr. Goodfellow, after a considerable searching in the cavity of the chest, was enabled to detect and to pull forth a bullet of very extraordinary size, which, upon trial, was found to be exactly adapted to the bore of Mr. Pennyfeather's rifle, while it was far too large for that of any other person in the borough or its vicinity. To render the matter even surer yet, however, this bullet was discovered to have a flaw or a seam at right angles to the usual suture, and upon examination, this seam corresponded precisely with an accidental ridge or elevation in a pair of molds, acknowledged by the accused himself to be his own property. Upon the finding of this bullet, the examining magistrate refused to listen to any further testimony and immediately committed the prisoner for trial, declining resolutely to take any bail in the case, although against this severity Mr. Goodfellow very warmly remonstrated and offered to become surety in whatever amount might be required. This generosity on the part of old Charlie was only in accordance with the whole tenor of his amiable and chivalrous conduct during the entire period of his sojourn in the borough of Rattle. In the present instance, the worthy man was so entirely carried away by the excessive warmth of his sympathy that he seemed to have quite forgotten when he offered to go bail for his young friend that he himself, Mr. Goodfellow, did not possess a single dollar's worth of property on the face of the earth. The result of the committal may be readily foreseen. Mr. Pennyfeather, amid the loud execrations of all Rattleborough, was brought to trial at the next criminal sessions, when the chain of circumstantial evidence, strengthened as it was by some additional damning facts which Mr. Goodfellow's sensitive conscientiousness forbade him to withhold from the court, was considered so unbroken and so thoroughly conclusive that the jury, without leaving their seats, returned an immediate verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. Soon afterwards, the unhappy wretch received sentence of death and was remanded to the county jail to await the inexorable vengeance of the law.
Okay. Next section, Jose, why don't you do it, and maybe Robert, can you read the letter? There's a letter that's there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you read that, and Jose, you do the narration.
In the meantime, the noble behavior of old Charlie Goodfellow had doubly endeared him to the honest citizens of the borough. He became 10 times a greater favorite than ever, and as a natural result of the hospitality with which he was treated, he relaxed, as it were, perforce, the extremely parsimonious habits which his poverty had hitherto impelled him to observe, and very frequently had little reunions at his own house, when wit and jollity reigned supreme, dampened a little, of course, by the occasional remembrance of the untoward and melancholy fate which impended over the nephew of the late lamented bosom friend of the generous host. One fine day, this magnanimous old gentleman was agreeably surprised at the receipt of the following letter.
Chateau Margaux A, number 1, 6 dozen bottles, from H.F.B. Company, Charles Goodfellow, Esquire, Rattleborough. Charles Goodfellow, Esquire. Dear Sir, in conformity with an order transmitted to our firm about 2 months since by our esteemed correspondent, Mr. Barnabas Shuttleworthy, we have the honor of forwarding this morning to your address a double box of Chateau Margaux of the Antelope brand, violet seal, box numbered and marked as per margin. We remain, sir, your most humble servants, Hogs, Frogs, and Bogs and Company. City of June 21st, 1844. P.S. The box will reach you by wagon on the day after your receipt of this letter. Our respects to Mr. Shuttleworthy, H.F.B. & Co.
The fact is that Mr. Goodfellow had, since the death of Mr. Shuttleworthy, given over all expectation of ever receiving the promised Chateau Margaux, and he therefore looked upon it now as a sort of especial dispensation of Providence in his behalf. He was highly delighted, of course, and in the exuberance of his joy, invited a large party of friends to a petit souper on the morrow, for the purpose of broaching the good old Mr. Shuttleworthy's present. Not that he said anything about the good old Mr. Shuttleworthy when he issued the invitations. The fact is, he thought much and concluded to say nothing at all. He did not mention to anyone, if I remember aright, that he had received a present of Chateau Margaux. He merely asked his friends to come and help him drink some of a remarkably fine quality and rich flavor that he had ordered up from the city a couple months ago, and of which he would be in receipt upon the morrow. I have often puzzled myself to imagine why it was that old Charlie came to the conclusion to say nothing about having received the wine from his old friend. But I could never precisely understand his reason for the silence, although he had some excellent and very magnanimous reason, no doubt. The morrow at length arrived, and with it a very large and highly respectable company at Mr. Goodfellow's house. Indeed, half the borough was there, I myself among the number. But much to the vexation of the host, the Chateau Margaux did not arrive until a late hour. And when the sumptuous supper supplied by Old Charlie had been done very ample justice by the guests, it came at length, however. A monstrously big box of it there was, too. And as the whole party were in excessively good humor, it was decided, nem. con, that it should be lifted upon the table and its contents disemboweled forthwith. No sooner said than done. I lent a helping hand. And in a trice, we had the box upon the table, in the midst of all the bottles and glasses, not a few of which were demolished in the scuffle. Old Charlie, who was pretty much intoxicated and excessively red in the face, now took a seat with an air of mock dignity at the head of the board, and thumped furiously upon it with a decanter, calling upon the company to keep order during the ceremony of disinterring the treasure. After some vociferation, quiet was at length fully restored, and, as very often happens in similar cases, a profound and remarkable silence ensued. Being then requested to force open the lid, I complied, of course, with an infinite deal of pleasure. I inserted a chisel, and giving it a few slight taps with a hammer, the top of the box flew suddenly and violently off, and at the same instant there sprang up into a sitting position directly facing the host the bruised, bloody, and nearly putrid corpse of the murdered Mr. Shutterworthy himself. It gazed for a few moments, fixedly and sorrowfully, with its decaying and lackluster eyes full into the countenance of Mr. Goodfellow, uttered slowly but clearly and impressively the words,
"Thou art the man."
and then, falling over the side of the chest as if thoroughly satisfied, stretched out its limbs quiveringly upon the table. The scene that ensued is altogether beyond description. The rush for the doors and windows was terrific, and many of the most robust men in the room fainted outright through sheer horror. But after the first wild, shrieking burst of affright, all eyes were directed to Mr. Goodfellow. If I live 1,000 years, I can never forget the more than mortal agony which was depicted in that ghastly face of his, so lately rubicund with triumph and wine. For several minutes he sat rigidly as a statue of marble, his eyes seeming, in the intense vacancy of their gaze, to be turned inward and absorbed in the contemplation of his own miserable, murderous soul. At length their expression appeared to flash suddenly out into the external world, when with a quick leap he sprang from his chair, and falling heavily with his head and shoulders upon the table and in contact with the corpse, poured out rapidly and vehemently a detailed confession of the hideous crime for which Mr. Pennyfeather was then imprisoned and doomed to die. What he recounted was in substance this: he followed his victim to the vicinity of the pool, there shot his horse with a pistol, dispatched the rider with its butt end, possessed himself of the pocketbook, and, supposing the horse dead, dragged it with great labor to the brambles by the pond. Upon his own beast he slung the corpse of Mr. Shuttleworthy, and thus bore it to a secure place of concealment, a long distance off through the woods. The waistcoat, the knife, the pocketbook, and bullet had been placed by himself where found, with the view of avenging himself upon Mr. Pennyfeather. He had also contrived the discovery of the stained handkerchief and shirt. Towards the end of the blood-chilling recital, the words of the guilty wretch faltered and grew hollow. When the record was finally exhausted, he arose, staggered backward from the table, and fell dead.
Kynan, you want to finish it?
Yeah. The means by which this happily timed confession was extorted, although efficient, were simple indeed. Mr. Goodfellow's excess of frankness had disgusted me and excited my suspicion, from the first. I was present when Mr. Pennyfeather had struck him, and the fiendish expression which then arose upon his countenance, although momentary, assured me that his threat of vengeance would, if possible, be rigidly fulfilled. I was thus prepared to view the maneuvering of Old Charlie in a very different light from that in which it was regarded by the good citizens of Rattleborough. I saw at once that all the criminating discoveries arose, either directly or indirectly, from himself. But the fact which clearly opened my eyes to the true state of the case was the affair of the bullet found by Mr. G in the carcass of the horse. I had not forgotten, although the Rattleburgers had, that there was a hole where the ball had entered the horse, and another where it went out. If it were found in the animal, then, after having made its exit, I saw clearly that it must have been deposited by the person who found it. The bloody shirt and handkerchief confirmed the idea suggested by the bullet, for the blood, upon examination, proved to be capital claret and no more. When I came to think of these things, and also of the late increase of liberality and expenditure on the part of Mr. Goodfellow, I entertained a suspicion which was none the less strong because I kept it altogether to myself. In the meantime, I instituted a rigorous private search for the corpse of Mr. Shuttleworthy, and, for good reasons, searched it in quarters as divergent as possible from those to which Mr. Goodfellow conducted his party. The result was that, after some days, I came across an old dry well, the mouth of which was nearly hidden by brambles. And here, at the bottom, I discovered what I sought. Now it so happened that I had overheard the colloquy between the two cronies when Mr. Goodfellow had contrived to cajole his host into the promise of a box of Chateau Margaux. Upon this hint I acted. I procured a stiff piece of whalebone, thrust it down the throat of the corpse, and deposited the latter in an old wine box, taking care so to double the body up as to double the whalebone with it. In this manner, I had to press forcibly upon the lid to keep it down, while I secured it with nails. And I anticipated, of course, that as soon as these latter were removed, the top would fly off, and the body fly up. Having thus arranged the box, I marked, numbered, and addressed it, as already told. And then, writing a letter in the name of the wine merchants with whom Mr. Shuttleworthy dealt, I gave instructions to my servant to wheel the box to Mr. Goodfellow's door in a barrow at a given signal from myself. For the words which I intended the corpse to speak, I confidently depended upon my ventriloquial abilities. For their effect, I counted upon the conscience of the murderous wretch. I believe there is nothing more to be explained. Mr. Pennyfeather was released upon the spot, inherited the fortune of his uncle, profited by the lessons of experience, turned over a new leaf, and led happily, ever afterwards, a new life.
So, everybody lived happily ever after. All right. Any thoughts?
Just a question. I wasn't exactly clear as to how the narrator came to view Mr. Goodfellow and why he was suspicious of Mr. Goodfellow in the first place. And it's something about the bullet having confirmed his suspicion. I didn't quite follow that.
Well, I thought the first suspicion was what he saw the fight.
Yeah.
And he saw the look in his eye.
Yeah, I got that, but it was the thing about the bullet in the.
We used to about the burgers forgot that the bullet hole had exited the horse.
Right.
When they first introduced the wounded horse, he made a point to mention that it had an exit wound.
Right.
So
But then they found the bullet in the horse. So if it came out, how could it be in there?
Right.
And because his name was Charlie.
What?
What did he say?
The beginning of the story has a whole thing about Charlie and how everybody always trusts people named Charles.
He also has this comment. He said something will turn up.
I thought the joke. I liked the joke. I'm not sure if I got it. I thought the joke was it's supposed to be Goodfellow.
Yeah. But when as he also said, just read over what it says. You're right about that too.
Is there another layer? Should I read the paragraph?
You should read the third paragraph. Yeah.
The foremost and most energetic in instituting the search was the bosom friend of Mr. Shuttleworthy, Mr. Charles Goodfellow, or as he was universally called, Charlie Goodfellow, or Old Charlie Goodfellow. Now, whether it is a marvelous coincidence, or whether it is that the name itself has an imperceptible effect upon the character, I have never yet been able to ascertain. But the fact is unquestionable that there never yet was any person named Charles who was not an open, manly, honest, good-natured, and frank-hearted fellow with a rich, clear voice that did you good to hear it, and an eye that looked you always straight in the face, as much as to say, I have a clear conscience, myself, am afraid of no man, and am altogether above doing a mean action. And thus all the hardy, careless, walking gentlemen of the stage are very certain to be called Charles.
Right. Right. So the point is that the paragraph is absurd, as are the beliefs of the people of Rattleboro.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
And that's the circumstance that, without overdoing this, that we find ourselves in. That's what we're in. As everybody knows who's watching or is part of this, around the forces that are assembled around Lyndon LaRouche, cult, crazy, crank, conspiracy, all this, right? Now, by the way, conspiracy is simply something that goes on all the time. If you want to see how rope-a-dope, take a good look again at the entirety of the Zelenskyy press conference. And what happens, because Trump extends it. Now, it's not a question whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump. Trump extends it. And Trump is involved, as he keeps saying, I'm trying to make a deal. He keeps saying this, right? When have you ever seen an American president do that with another ostensible head of state? I mean, you can't think of any case, you won't find any case in American history of anything like that being done publicly.
There should be more. Yeah.
So obviously but it was obviously staged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't staged by Zelenskyy. He thought he was staging it. As
was the
right.
He walked into a setup.
Into this thing.
Yeah.
It's like the scene in Goodfellas where the guy thinks he's gonna go get made.
You're made, right?
But he walks into the room and then they shoot him instead.
Yeah. Well, he walked into a setup as soon as he took the lead role in Servant of the People.
Yeah. Just right. Well, that's true too, but this is different.
No, yeah.
Because he thought he had an arrangement. The arrangement had been made with Macron and Starmer and so on.
Right.
Instead of that, that phone call that Robert De Niro gets, it didn't work out.
Yeah, right.
It really didn't work out. He's gone.
That's good. Yeah.
Now, I mean, because people have to realize, in effect, Zelenskyy is gone.
Yeah. He's finished. They just
now, whatever happens, literally whatever happens, he's gone. Because how do the Europeans now deal with him? They've got to decide that. There's a meeting on Sunday, supposedly in Paris. Right? I mean, and remember that J.D. Vance had made something very clear at Munich, and Europe is rocked and reeling because they can't believe of the same thing that many people in America believe, which is that, deep state is omnipotent, as they call it. The secret arrangements are omnipotent. Everybody is run by the secret arrangements. You can't ever get out of the web of the secret arrangements. That's what people believe. Precisely because they believe that, they are completely vulnerable. And that's what happened over the course of the last 10 days. They can't adjust because they can't give up that as an axiomatic belief, because it was on the basis of that axiomatic belief that they made all of their compromises as people through their entire careers. So in order for them to challenge that axiomatic belief, what would have to happen is that they would have to be confronted with precisely what happens in this story with the corpse. Now, Art Demand, you might be able to get a confession if you got that. And that's what you have going on. So but the reason in terms of Poe with respect to this story, and there are many other things one can say, I think it's just useful to read it because it's all there, really. Not much need to be added. It's right there in what he wrote. I remember the story is, I will play Oedipus in the Brattleboro Enigma. Why is that sentence? What's that sentence mean?
Yeah, so it's spelled is it actually is it the Greek hero Oedipus? Is that okay?
Anybody have an idea about that? Why that's said? Adrian there, he might have an idea.
Adrian's not here.
Okay.
Well, he might be on the chat.
Okay. Well,
but Oedipus has to solve 3 riddles at the very beginning of the story when they confront him. Forget what they are.
No, it's a riddle of the Sphinx.
Yeah. But there's 2 that precede that. Yeah. But anyway, yes.
It has to do with the plague, right? He has to solve the riddle to end the plague.
To end the plague, yeah.
Right.
And that's why he's welcome to the town, because he's done that.
Right. Or walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 1 and 3 at night.
3 in the evening, yeah.
Yeah.
But so he's saying he's going to play Oedipus to the Rattleboro Enigma. Right. So what's the story addressed to? We keep hearing about the Rattleburgers, right?
Yeah.
So what's the issue?
Well,
however these matters may be, which have no reference to the point now at issue, it is quite certain that the people of Rattleboro, principally through the persuasion of Mr. Pettifeather, came at length to the determination of dispersing over the adjacent country, asserted the Mr. Shuttlesworthy. I say they came to this determination in the first instance, after it had been fully resolved that a search should be made, considered almost a matter of course that the seekers should disperse, that is, distribute themselves in parties for the more thorough examination of the region around them. I forget, however, by what ingenious train of reasoning it was that old Charlie finally convinced the assembly that this was the most injudicious plan that could be pursued. Convinced them, however, he did, all except Mr. Pennyfeather. And in the end, it was arranged that a search should be instituted carefully and very thoroughly by the burghers en masse, old Charlie himself leading the way. So they are all convinced by old Charlie to follow him, because they are convinced that he has the clearest idea of what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And at no point do they suspect, until the end of the story, that something is amiss. right? They're all there at the party, right? It says half the borough was there. Remember that? The morrow at length arrived, and with it a very large and highly respectable company at Mr. Goodfellow's house. Indeed, half the borough was there, I myself among the number. So they were all there for the celebration.
Right.
So at no point do they actually suspect that there's anything wrong, especially after the various clues, and then the the trial happens and the sentence is given. They're convinced that justice has been served, right?
Right.
Like in a lot of death penalty cases, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So look at the people of the United States and what has now happened as of tonight with respect to the case of Ukraine. And look at what Trump has said about Putin to them. What after all, right? What did he say?
Yeah.
Because, right, he's trying to establish why he has to be impartial in the deliberations with Ukraine and Putin. So he's not deliberating on the side of Zelensky. He's saying, I've got to get a deal. And he says, if you look at the larger press conference, I think he also said it there, but he says in the large press conference that Zelensky hates Putin. And the Russians don't particularly like him much either.
Yeah.
And he's got to get a deal.
Yeah.
You realize what that's going to mean we can do with Trump? Not that he will listen, on the question of Gaza. Can't we now say to him, well, as in the case of Ukraine and Russia, where we gave gazillions of dollars, $350 billion to Ukraine. What about the case of Gaza and Israel? You want a deal there? How can there be partiality of the type that has been expressed? Now, what's important, you see, is that we're not bystanders in any of this. You know, we have proposals for both situations and other situations. But it's important from a Methodist standpoint. Let's just coming back to the issues of, the Vega candidacy and also issues of justice. It's important for us, I think, to have the idea that what Poe is introducing here is he's trying to show the methods of correcting a society which are not democratic. The democratic mob, the democratic citizens of Rattleboro convicted an innocent man and were led to do so by the person that carried out the crime.
Yeah.
And it took one person who understood that this was not true to transform the situation and to cause the criminal to confess, without whose confession then the crime would not be revealed. And then the criminal carries out sentence on himself. That's the difference between force and power. There was a whole discussion today on the International Peace Coalition meeting about something the different words were used there. What was used there was a difference between power and potency. And the idea being people can have arbitrary power, so you can impose sanctions on people, but that doesn't mean you're winning them over to your point of view. You're merely imposing through force a condition that they don't control. Or what was done in Romania with the candidate for election, with whom, for example, we would have severe disagreements, but trying to stop him on his way to file his papers, then you basically, arrest him, you detain him, and you slap a bunch of charges on him. And then you call that democracy. Well, that's the same thing. So anyway, all right. So I don't know that there's more. Does anybody have any other comments on this before we move on? Or
I want to make a comment.
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, just two things. One is on the story. I had this image of when the body jumped up out of the box. I had the image of Zelensky sitting there listening to Trump. It's just kind of a funny image, but I just think when Trump today, or just mentioned the letter, he kept mentioning, the 51 people who had signed the letter, which of course are some of the first people he stripped of their security clearances, which is like a really big deal. So if you actually read the letter, it's very much along the lines of what he's attacking in the story as how you come to conclusions. And if you look at who signed the letter, I mean, these 51 people, I mean, these are like former director of staff, CIA, former, inspector general. I mean, they're like the major people in intelligence, and they signed this thing. And the letter is exactly this kind of thing of, they never said they actually knew that the Russians had initiated this Hunter Biden thing, which is what they were charged with, that they were the ones behind the release of the laptop. But what they do is they say, well, we're intelligence agents. We're defending the country. We know the way the Russians work. We know the Russians, and we know that the Russians are involved in these kinds of tactics. We know the Russians are, for instance, infiltrating around Giuliani. Giuliani's the one that released the emails. Now, we're not saying for sure that this is all true, but we can presume, because of all these things they talk about the Russians they know had done the hacking, the Russians they know, Mueller charged them, with having been involved in the disruption of the election. And they go through all these things they say they know, most of which are also not true. But then from that, they say they can conclude that most likely this was a Russian operation. That's all that the letter says. But it's just interesting because the fact that these are intelligence agents in the first place, I mean, particularly when I had read that letter, because we used it at the meeting we did in White Plains area, and then read the story. We read it in the house. This story about there's the man, or this is the man. It's really interesting because we had this discussion saying if Tulsi Gabbard comes in, stripping these people of their intelligence standings is the first thing, because that story strips them of their intelligence standings. The fact that they would ever write a letter with absolutely no evidence except their presumptions about what they think they know, and then from there do that thing. I thought it was really a good example, of applying the story in that approach and what it led to what what you had with that letter. So
there are two things here, though. There are two things in what you're saying. No, that's right. The name of the story is "Thou Art the Man." Right. That is not the same thing as saying "There is the man," right, or "There's the man."
Yeah.
No. And this is the key to the entire approach of the LaRouche organization over decades. Thou art, naming the names,
right,
saying who is guilty by name, like what we say about British intelligence, not the deep state.
Right.
The notion of the deep state is impotent. It is actually also cowardly and is always unrigorous. And that's why it's popular. people do not want to name what can be clearly identified. And that is what is happening in something like the letter between Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. See, they're saying, she said, no, I want everything
Right.
tomorrow morning. Not I want the New York documents. I don't care if the documents are from Hawaii. Everything on my desk at 8 a.m. You know what that means? That if anything else comes up, gets revealed from here on in, that didn't come in by 8 o'clock, guess what? Doesn't matter what your reason is, you're out.
Right.
Doesn't matter why you released that. It's with the exception that you discovered it and you never knew it existed. And you can demonstrate that. But if you come forward, first of all, if you're discovered to have still withholding things, you're going to get fired, you're going to get disciplined, you're going to get prosecuted anyway. But also, it's now too late.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is a case of where, you know, they name the name, so to speak. They're saying, well, that, you know,
Right.
this is what they're doing. And so this is very useful because it's the first, you know, it's the first action, and they're taking it. And I think what you said is very important in terms of and yes, the Hunter Biden laptop is exactly what went on in the story. Because what they said is, it is a classic, textbook case of a classic Russian disinformation campaign.
Right.
That was the phrase. It doesn't say anything, just like you said.
Yeah.
That doesn't say that it's the case. They just say what they said. And all media, with the exception, of course, of the New York Post, which was suppressed, abided by that. That is the so-called legacy media. All right, so I think that's it for me. I'm going to be going for other reasons, something else. Anything else? Anybody else?
Wrote in.
Just general comments talking about what was talked about earlier. The FBI in New York is hiding the rest of the documents. Somebody said that earlier. Somebody said hi. I think that's that for that. I would just urge people to tune in at 8 o'clock on the TLO show. You know, Diane Sarah will be going live. I don't know who's going to be going live.
Yeah, and I'll be doing it.
Oh, you're doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why I got to get off. Get ready for that.
What's it about?
Britain delenda est.
Oh, great.
Britain must be destroyed.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, nice.
All right. I agree. Okay. People want more Dennis Speed. Check them out at 8 o'clock on the TLO show. And with that, we are